Why is it when you have people over in your house, everybody always says, yo, bro, you got a bathroom? Yo, bro, you got water?
Nah, bro, I shit outside. Nah, bro, I gather up rainwater. We only drink water when it rains.
Wait, do you see that?
I think it's just like because you don't want to like be like, yo, bro, like where do you at?
Nah,
like,
but
I got
nah.
a bathroom, right? You think I could like go? I guess they're shy to ask or something.
I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. I don't ever slow up, no I don't take shit. I got no love for the fakeness. If you wanna play tough and wanna hate this, I'll always show up and make a statement. Everything I do so instinctive and so passionate. Every word I move so descriptive like an adjective. I got a vendetta against people who patented being negative when you should be getting after it. I got facts over tracks, this and that. Spitting slow, spitting fast. I could roast, I could gas. Think I'm okay at last, but I don't know if that can erase all the past. And the pettiness, a reflection of the emptiness. Hilarious, you think you're worth my time, you're delirious. Mysterious, because you hide behind a fake exterior. Inferior, you know I'll always be a bit superior. Get off of me, this ain't no humble brag.
Sparkly costume glasses, a neon skull, a skeleton, and a witch bucket. Would you visit?
A young woman was found hanged, but police suspect it was staged. Giselle Tapia Salazar was a 30-year-old mother from Texas. She was described as a charismatic and kind woman who always saw the best in everyone. She was a dedicated mother of 4 children. Recently, her loved ones had a horrific shock. Giselle was found deceased and hanging from a dock into the water on the 31st of May this year. This was in League City. Police confirmed that they had discovered her lifeless body dangling from a rope. On first glance, it looked like she had simply unalived herself. However, investigators decided to take a closer look. They're now stating that due to the position that her arm was found in, they believe that the scene was staged. They are suspecting she was murdered elsewhere and then placed in the position that she was found. Now, this may have been an attempt to make a homicide look like a self-unaliving. Her arm was up in a strange position and rigor mortis had set in, meaning that when she was moved to the other place, her arm remained in the stiff position that it had been originally. Her death is now being treated as foul play. The boat that she was found hanging near to was her boyfriend James Hart's boat. He spoke out after her death and stated, "This is the worst thing that has ever happened to me. It feels like a nightmare you can't wake up from. I didn't have anything to do with it and I never would have. I love Giselle more than anything in the world. We were together 24/7. I want justice for Giselle and for myself." Investigators stated that when James was told his girlfriend was deceased, he became distraught and refused to come out of his boat.
These are people who died on live TV, and this one is absolutely gut-turning.
Many of the deaths that we witnessed on live TV are the product of 24-hour news channels. Because all live news events are completely unwritten. Covering things like hostage crises, attacks, and high-speed chases are bound to go terribly wrong. And there's no telling when exactly this will happen. That's exactly what led to Fox News having to issue an apology on September 28, 2012. They were covering a high-speed chase in Arizona, and even the police backed off when they realized the danger. In place, they opted to plan undercover surveillance and tailed him from the sky in a helicopter. Jodan Romero already had a warrant out for his arrest when he stole an SUV at gunpoint earlier that morning. He weaved through traffic like a madman and sped down commercial areas and ran red lights. When he drove past a group of undercover officers, he opened fire on them through the driver's window. Some believe Jodan had a death wish himself. And finally, after hours, he appeared to have given up. He parked the SUV with the Fox News cameras zooming in on him. At this point, even the on-air reporter expressed concerns. Jodan then took off running and tumbled to the ground. He quickly jumped back to his feet and he was carrying something in his hand. You couldn't tell because of the camera angle, but it was a gun. He then walked towards some shrubbery and immediately unalived himself in the head, as hundreds of thousands of people watched. And obviously I can't show the video, but I'll show you a clip leading up to that exact moment.
Just not sure about this. He's getting things out of the vehicle, clearly. It doesn't appear that there's anyone else with him. Well, you know, you wait for the end of these things, and then you worry about how they may end. There's nobody else around him. This makes me a little nervous, I gotta tell you. Get off it.
21-year-old Lily James was found brutally murdered in her school's gym bathroom, and the person responsible was one of her scorned male colleagues. Lily was a water polo coach at St. Andrew's Cathedral School in Sydney, Australia. For the past 5 weeks before her death, Lily was dating 24-year-old Paul Thyssen, who was a cricket and hockey coach at the same school. But just days before, Lily had actually broken up with Paul and just wanted to remain friendly with her male colleague. But on October 25th, Lily was reported missing after failing to return home. Just before midnight, police received a phone call from Paul stating that there was a body at the school that should be investigated, and when police arrived, they walked into a gruesome scene. There in the school's gym bathroom was a woman who had been a clear victim of homicide. Police described the woman as having serious head injuries from a hammer that left her to be unrecognizable, so much so that it took them until the next morning to officially identify her as Lily. Authorities began combing through surveillance footage and found that Lily was last seen alive on CCTV footage entering the gym bathroom around 7 p.m. the night she was found. Paul was seen following her close behind and entering the bathroom as well. It's assumed that a fight broke out between the two of them, and then an hour later, Paul was seen leaving the bathroom without Lily. Sometime after the attack, Paul texted Lily's dad from her phone asking to be picked up from the school. He then went to Diamond Bay Reserve, which was his last known location, and dumped a backpack containing some personal belongings and a hammer, which was later determined to be the murder weapon. Around 2 hours later, this is when Paul called 911 to report the body at the school. After this, Paul disappeared, and this is when police publicly identified him as the prime suspect in Lily's death. His body would be found 2 days later on the rocks beneath Diamond Bay Reserve by a group of tradesmen. He was identified via fingerprints, and it was determined that he ended his own life after murdering Lily. There were no reported domestic violence issues between the two of them in the past, but that doesn't really mean anything because, as we all know, we never truly know what happens behind closed doors. Lily was described as the nicest and kindest person who was vibrant, outgoing, and very much loved by her family and friends. I've attached a GoFundMe in my bio created for Lily's family to take the time necessary to grieve this incredible loss. I'd like to end this video on a note from Lily's grandma. She said, quote, "Some people come into this world, I think they are so special, and they don't stay long. I think that was my granddaughter," end quote.
My mom told me that in Mexico, right? Her grandma was taking care of her grandchild and shit, and like they were all sleeping and shit. And then like out of nowhere, she woke up because she felt like the baby moving. And she said that fucking like turkey, bro.
A turkey?
A turkey, bro. A big ass turkey was inside the house trying to take the baby, bro. She ended up her like the turkey up, and then the turkey fucking ran out the fucking window, bro. And like my mom tells me that was a witch, bro.
That was a witch?
Yes, bro. They shapeshift and shit, bro. You never heard of that shit, bro?
Nah.
Yeah, witches be shapeshifting.
Bro, why does everything happen in Mexico, bro? Like, every scary shit happens in Mexico. To correct that, not even just Mexico, all, like, South America countries.
Oh, everywhere, bro. Everywhere that's not, like I think, highly populated is like that, bro.
This disgusting pedophile was captured after using PayPal to purchase CP and CSAM. This is 24-year-old Nicholas Brenshaw from Utah. So investigators started looking into Nicholas in the year 2013. And from December of 2013 to July of 2016, authorities found that Nicholas paid over $2,700 to illegal websites to purchase CP. And while authorities were investigating Nicholas and discovering his disturbing secrets, they found that he was chatting with 19-year-old Elijah Roberts, also from Utah. So Elijah and Nicholas would use apps like Kik and Wicker, I've never heard of Wicker, to exchange CP materials. They would also chat about their deep, disturbing desires to be alone with children. These chats were allegedly extremely graphic and extremely disturbing. So when pedophile Elijah Roberts was arrested in 2016, the authorities found out that he had also allegedly assaulted a 14-year-old boy. He was also found to have been offering this young boy to other men online, meaning he wanted people to come over and assault this boy too. Thankfully though, both of these freaks were sent to prison, but sadly Elijah was sentenced to only 60 months in prison. This is only 5 years. I think both of them deserve longer sentences, but what can I say? This is America. We prefer to punish drug users as opposed to pedophiles.
This is by far the craziest video of 2024.
This is a video that has gone viral in the past couple days in which a father or mother's boyfriend is threatening the son to shoot him, and he does. The video opens up with the father or boyfriend pointing the gun at the son. He can be heard saying, "I'm going to blow his effing brains out right now." The mother then comes over and pulls the father away, screaming, "No, no, stop." The father then walks away and the son then says, "Blow my brains out." The father then comes back into the room screaming, "You want me to?" while pointing the gun at him. The son flinches at this point and turns away and says, "Shoot me, I dare you. I guarantee you go to jail for life." The mother then shuts the door and you hear the father saying, "I'm getting ready to blow his brains out and yours. I'm sick of this," to the mother. The son then gets up and opens the door. He then says, "You're going to blow my mom's brains out?" The father then points the gun back at the son and fires. Everything goes silent as you hear the mom gasp. The camera then faces the floor and you hear the mom repeating, "Did he hit you? Did he hit you?" And at this point you see blood droplets hitting the floor. Once this happened, the mom screams, "Oh my god, you're going to jail." The son then runs out of the house and shuts the door. The video then ends. Luckily, the bullet only grazed the son's ear and he survived, and the father or mother's boyfriend then went into the backyard and ended his own life. Probably because he thought he killed the son with that shot. I don't know what caused this whole situation, but it had to be brewing for some time for the man to snap like this. You can find the video on Twitter and it has over 25 million views in just a couple of days.
A parole officer never returned to work after doing a routine check. What had happened to him was the last thing anyone expected. 54-year-old convicted S offender Emmanuel Edward Sewell lived in Maryland. Now, he had a dark criminal past and had spent many years in prison for R. Back in 1996, on Halloween, he'd broken into a man's house through the downstairs open window. He threatened him at knife point, then tied him up, and then SA'd him. He then stole the man's bank card, his video recorder, and also his car. Now, he was on probation and was having regular checks from parole officers. On the 31st of May 2023, parole officer Davis Martinez was due to go and check on Emmanuel. When his colleagues never heard back from him that day, they got increasingly concerned. It shouldn't have been taking him as long as it was. They decided to send over some backup and just see what was going on. They had absolutely no idea of the horrors they would find. Police showed up to Emmanuel's apartment in Chevy Chase to see all of the blinds and curtains closed. They called out and no one appeared to be home. But they knew that this is where their colleague had been. They decided to force entry into the home, and what they found behind the door would traumatize them. Their colleague was dead in the fetal position underneath the bed. He was wrapped in plastic and nearby was a bloody towel. He'd been stabbed in the head, neck, and face. Now, investigators started interviewing neighbours to put a timeline together of what had gone on here. One neighbour reported hearing knocking at Emmanuel's door at about 9 a.m. The neighbour reported then at a later stage seeing Emmanuel leave the property and quickly return. He was also allegedly spotted driving off in his car with clear bin bags full of clothing. Emmanuel has been arrested and has been charged with second-degree murder.
This woman was brutally murdered and targeted by a complete stranger for being a woman and walking alone at night. This is 25-year-old Mitchell Dang. She loved to vlog her life on YouTube and she was so kind. But on August 26th of this year, she would post her last vlog before she would be brutally murdered by a complete stranger after leaving a music venue. That day, Mitchell vlogged her outfit and she was happy and dancing. She was really excited about going to a nightclub with her friends, and the last thing she told the world was, quote, "I'm just going to dance my heart away." End quote. She was last seen alive that night leaving the Alley Cat music venue in Atlanta, Georgia. She would be missing for 4 days until her nude body was found stashed underneath a stairwell in the basement of a parking garage. What's really sad is that it took authorities 4 days to find her, but the parking garage where she was found was right across the street from the Fulton County Courthouse. It would take nearly a month, but security footage from the parking garage and Mitchell's MARTA card information led police to 24-year-old Jacavius Arnold, who admitted to killing her. Security footage showed Mitchell leaving the venue the night she was killed, and shortly after she was approached by Jacavius. He was a complete stranger to her, but according to police, he pretended to be a good Samaritan and insisted on helping her find her car. The two were then seen on CCTV walking around the parking garage where her body would later be found. According to Jacavius, he forced Mitchell under the stairwell, choked her until she passed out, and then proceeded to sexually assault her. But Mitchell woke up sometime during the assault, so he strangled her again until she died. Police say Jacavius then took off all of her clothes and sexually assaulted her corpse for at least 20 minutes before stealing her cell phone, covering her face with a newspaper, and leaving her. He did admit to returning once more to the scene to get his sunglasses and to hide her body more. What's absolutely terrifying is that Jacavius also admitted to 2 additional sexual assaults under the exact same circumstances, targeting women walking alone at night. He has since been arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, aggravated sexual battery, and necrophilia, amongst many other charges. I've attached a GoFundMe in my bio created for Mitchell's family to take the time to grieve this horrible loss. Mitchell's dad has gone on to say that ever since her life was taken, their entire family sleeps together in the living room. He says they can't separate, that they have to stay together to fill up the emptiness.
You think trust issues is a big problem in like this day and age?
Of like dating?
Not just in general.
I would say yes.
Why?
I'm gonna speak of, like, on the relationship side. The way I see it is like 2 people get in a relationship and like they think like one person is cheating on the other.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, in reality, nobody's really cheating on nobody, and they're just being paranoid and not trusting that person.
Yeah, I guess it's not the person's fault for having trust issues though.
Nah,
like,
it definitely
because like the other day I was thinking about it and I'm like, people have hurt me, I have hurt people, but is it my fault that I hurt the people because I've been hurt before? That's been on my mind. People are probably gonna say like, yes, it is your fault because you could be the bigger person to change. But sometimes it's hard to get over that and it's hard to heal and it takes some time, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know, like let's say I get cheated on, right, and I have trust issues and I bring that along with me and my trust issues end up hurting somebody else because I couldn't trust them enough, so I couldn't love them enough yet.
These are clips from disturbing movies you should never watch, part 1.
The first movie in this series is gonna have to be The Strange Thing About the Johnsons. It's an extremely unsettling and disturbing short film on YouTube directed by Ari Aster. And if you know anything about this movie, you know just how disturbing and weird it is. The clip I'm about to show you from this movie is one of the most unsettling and disturbing scenes from it. I'm not going to spoil it in case some of you haven't seen it, but if you know, you know. Here it is.
It's gonna be okay. I'm just gonna come home a little bit later, okay? That's all.
A person who wakes up in the morning and says today's going to be awful, I just know it. Well, that person is just about guaranteed to have an awful day. In fact, he'll do the legwork to make it awful. Through the power of his attitude, he'll prevent every potentially good thing on his path from reaching its potential. And if good things do happen, well, he'll be looking in the other direction. Because what he's done is he's committed himself to the prison of negativity. Now, on the other side of this coin, a person who wakes up and greets the day with enthusiasm and positivity will see the good things on his path. Because through the power of
Dad? How do I feel about locked doors?
I am here. Only you can determine the day. But it's true. The quality of your is entirely dependent. If you decide that your life will be prosperous and filled with joy, then that is what it shall be. But know this, a man who feeds on negativity.
Damn it, I need a VP now.
85 over 40.
Okay, gonna need 70 more milligrams. Stat.
Blood pressure, give it to me. Pulse is 93. Yes? Right.
I said 70 milligrams, people. Do I have to get on my hands and knees here?
I've only got 2 hands, doctor.
So use them. This poor bastard's gonna die on the flat. We don't work miracles and fast.
The right ventricle's dilated.
Suction! Quick!
This man bought rope, tied a noose, drove his friend out to the woods, and encouraged her to take her own life. This man's name is Tyrell, and this story is incredibly disturbing. So the 16-year-old girl who unfortunately took her own life was Chandra Brown. Chandra was a 16-year-old girl living in Utah who her whole family called Jelly because she loved Jelly Belly jelly beans. But on May 16, 2017, a turkey hunter walking through the woods would discover Chandra's body hanging from a white rope. Next to her feet was a cell phone, a can of canned air, and a name tag for a fast food restaurant that said Jelly. Now, police obviously thought that this was somebody who took their own life, but when they looked through Chandra's cell phone, they found something disturbing. You see, there was actually a recording of the moments leading up to Chandra taking her own life. And in that recording, a male voice can be heard almost encouraging her to go through with it. It was eventually revealed that the man in that video was 18-year-old Tyrell Shibishing. Tyrell had actually purchased the rope for Chandra, he had tied the noose for her, and he had basically encouraged her to go through with it. Now at the beginning, Tyrell acted like this was a horrible tragedy and he felt bad for doing what he did. But when investigators searched through his messages, they found some disturbing stuff. So 17 days before Chandra took her own life, Tyrell texted somebody and said, "What do you do if you know that your friend is going to take their own life?" The friend he texted then replied, "Talk them out of it." Tyrell then responded, "The thing is, I want to help kill them. It'd be awesome. Seriously, I'm going to help her. It's like getting away with murder. Seriously, I'm not joking. It's going down in about a week or two." In an even more disturbing text message, Tyrell at one point texted Chandra before she took her own life and said, "Can I mutilate your body and cut your head off and dispose of it somewhere else?" After Chandra had taken her own life and Tyrell had helped her, he texted another friend and said, "Bro, it happened. I helped her do it too and I feel so guilty." But the most damning evidence was that video clip. So in that footage, which Tyrell is filming, Chandra sits with a noose around her neck standing on top of a rock in the woods. They speak to each other and then Chandra takes that can of air duster and inhales it. Afterwards, Chandra then giggles because of the high produced by the duster can. She then loses consciousness and falls off of the rock. So Tyrell, instead of helping out someone who's trying to take their own life, then just sits there and keeps asking questions. He says to himself, that didn't work, that didn't seem to work, but he keeps asking Chandra questions, even though it's very clear that she's already dead. Eventually, he was sentenced to only 5 years in prison. Some people thought that was fair. Many others claimed he should have been in prison for a much longer time. What are your thoughts on this disturbing case?
I bet you've never heard of the female Peterborough serial killer. Joanna Denny was born in St Albans, Hertfordshire. When she was just 16, she ran away from home with her older boyfriend. He was 21-year-old John Trina. Now, Joanna would regularly take substances and drink heavily. This became an issue when she got pregnant the following year. She gave birth to a daughter, but it didn't change her partying ways. She then got pregnant again in 2005, and when she gave birth, John decided to leave her and take the children. She was unwilling to care for them, and her lifestyle made it really unsafe for children. She was also regularly cheating on him as well. She actually decided to move to Peterborough and met a new man called Gary Richards. The pair were friends, but it's believed that Gary had feelings for her. She was regularly engaging in S-work to fund her lifestyle and ensure that she could still buy those substances. By this point, Joanna was 29 years old. In February 2012, she was arrested for theft. This was actually the catalyst to a number of very serious events. She was hospitalized temporarily in a psychiatric facility. She received a diagnosis of OCD and antisocial disorder. No one had any idea of just how bad things were about to get. At some point between the 19th of March and the 29th of March 2013, Joanna met 31-year-old Lucas Slabowski. They were both into a similar lifestyle of drinking substances. Joanna took Lucas to another property and blindfolded him. She then stabbed him through the heart. She kept his body in a bin for days before taking her next victim. This was 56-year-old John Chapman. He was actually one of her flatmates. She also stabbed him, killing him as well. But she didn't stop there, and a matter of hours later she met up with her landlord. This was 48-year-old Kevin Lee. The pair had been having a sexual relationship, and she made him put a black dress on covered in sequins, and then she stabbed him to death too. Joanna's friend Gary actually helped her to dispose of the victims' bodies. This was along with another man, Leslie Layton. The trio dumped the remains in various ditches around Peterborough. After disposing of the bodies, the three of them then drove to Hereford. There they bumped into two unfortunate men. John Rogers and Robin Bereza were out walking their dogs. They were ambushed by Joanna, who was carrying a knife. Now, Joanna had previously told her two male friends that she wanted to have some fun. She stabbed both of the men in a callous attack. Thankfully, both men got speedy medical attention and survived. They would later be key to her conviction. Meanwhile, days after his death, Kevin's family reported him missing to police. A search began and he was found in a ditch. Now, Joanna had gone on the run, but thankfully police managed to track her down and arrest her. She was captured on CCTV in the police station, laughing and flirting with the officers. She was eventually sentenced to life in prison and is only the third woman in the UK to be sentenced to a whole life tariff. This places her alongside infamous killers Myra Hindley and Rose West. Her motive for the killings appears to be just that she felt it was good entertainment. As for her accomplices, the men that helped Joanna told police that they did so out of fear. They didn't want to be the next victims. Gary was given life in prison with a minimum of 19 years and Leslie got 14.
How do you accidentally stuff yourself inside of a burn barrel and then sink to the bottom of a pond on your own property? Because that's what police are saying happened to her, and I am not convinced. Let's talk about the mysterious death of Debbie Wolf, otherwise known as the body in the barrel. So on December 25th, 1985, 28-year-old Debbie finished her shift as a nurse at a local hospital in Fayetteville, North Carolina. She left around 4 p.m. and was likely headed to her isolated cabin about 4 miles from the city. She lived in the cabin alone, and although it was pretty desolate and heavily wooded, she had her 2 dogs to keep her company. She was supposed to go back to work the next morning at 8, but she never showed, and she never called either. This was especially odd because Debbie literally never missed work. She was super reliable and always on time, but that morning, nobody could get into contact with her, which worried her family. So her mom and a family friend drove to her cabin, and immediately upon arriving, they felt like something was wrong. Debbie was known to be extremely tidy and neat, but when her family got to her cabin, it was an absolute mess. First off, her dogs were running loose in the front yard, which Debbie never allowed, and they also hadn't been fed yet, which was unusual. Beer cans were littered all over the place, and it wasn't even a beer that Debbie was known to drink either. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Debbie's car was parked in a different spot than usual, and the front driver's seat was pushed all the way back. Keep in mind, Debbie was only 5'3", so this would have been way too far back for her to drive. So immediate red flags, right? Well, it only got worse when they went inside the cabin. It looked as if things had been thrown around inside, and her work uniform was laying on the kitchen floor. Her purse wasn't in its typical spot by the front door, but instead it was shoved into a tight spot under her bed. A light was blinking on her answering machine, indicating that she had a voicemail, and when her family played it, it sent chills down their spine. The voicemail was left earlier that morning, and it was from a man at the hospital Debbie worked at. It wasn't from her boss, though. Instead, it was from a volunteer who called to ask how she was doing. The man goes on to say that Debbie had missed several days of work and he was worried about her, but her family knew right away that this was not true. In fact, Debbie had only missed a few hours of work at this point, as she was just there the day before. So obviously her mom became extremely worried, and the two began looking for Debbie outside the cabin and near the pond on her property, but they didn't find anything. They tried to report her missing to the Cumberland County Sheriff's Department, but they told her that she had to wait 72 hours to file a report. So 3 days came and went, but it would take police 5 days just to get involved. So already not off to a good start. When police searched Debbie's cabin, they didn't find anything either, and they even brought in bloodhounds. They told her family that there was no need to search the pond because they could see the bottom, and clearly there was no body in the water. It seemed like the police honestly just didn't care, so Debbie's mom hired her own set of divers, and what they found is bizarre. The divers, along with Debbie's family friends, started wading through the water, and about 2 minutes in, they found what looked to be 2 sets of footprints and drag marks into the pond. When they went underwater, they immediately saw a 55-gallon burn barrel at the bottom, and stuffed inside, head first, was Debbie. Police were called back to the scene, but this is where things start to not add up. Debbie was dressed in clothes that weren't hers, including a men's jacket, a Pittsburgh Steelers t-shirt, pants that were way too long, a bra that was 3 sizes too big, and she had men's shoes on. So this is already odd, but adding to the mystery is the fact that there were no signs of foul play on her body at all. And after an autopsy was conducted, only half a teaspoon of water was found in Debbie's lungs. But even after all of this suspicious evidence, the medical examiner ruled that Debbie must have drowned, and it was all an accident. No drugs or alcohol were found in her system either. The police came up with the theory that Debbie must have been playing outside with her dogs that day and accidentally fell in the water. But this doesn't really make sense to me considering that she was found in 5.5 feet of water, about 30 feet from the bank of the pond. Now, to kind of paint a picture, the water surrounding the edge of this pond was only about 1 inch or 2 deep, and it very gently sloped down to the deepest part of the pond. For the most part, it was pretty much just knee deep unless you went extremely far out. So if she was playing with her dogs that day and just accidentally fell in, how did she end up 30 feet from the bank? She was known to be a good swimmer too, so I feel like if she fell in, she would have been able to get out pretty easily. But here's what's odd. As the investigation continued, police began denying that Debbie was found in a barrel, and they pretty much said that it never existed. When her mom double-checked with the divers and the family friend, they all said 100% she was found in a barrel, but they left it there, expecting the police to pick it up that day as evidence. But by the next morning, the barrel had vanished. Authorities said that the divers must have just thought that they saw a barrel, when really it was probably just Debbie's jacket they saw. They said that it must have just puffed up from the angle that she was laying at the bottom of the pond, making it look like a barrel. But Debbie's mom was not buying what they were telling her, and she even remembered that Debbie used to store her firewood in a burn barrel just like the one described. But when she went to go look for it at the cabin, it wasn't there. But what was there were the indents of the barrel, like it had recently been moved. Police say Debbie's death was accidental, but her mom believes that she was murdered, specifically by one of the men who volunteered at the hospital hospital. Not long before Debbie died, she had told her family that a volunteer at her job wanted to date her, but she rejected the guy and said that they would be better off as friends. This man was reportedly interviewed the day her body was found, but was let go. And after refusing to take a polygraph test, he left town for good. It's weird to me that he left that voicemail for Debbie that day. It kind of seems like an alibi to me, trying to cover his tracks. Debbie's mom believes that she was murdered in her cabin, put inside the barrel to make it easier to roll to the pond, and then dropped in. She thinks the killer then returned to the site after the fact to take the barrel, since it was never found, as a way to make her death look accidental. There are just so many things about this case that point to it being a homicide. For starters, if what police are saying is true, that she was never in a barrel and just in the water, why was her body and the clothes she had on completely clean? You would think that if she had been in the water for 6 days that she would be covered in debris, or at least have insect bites or something, but she was completely clean. The beer cans scattered in her yard were never tested for DNA either, so either the police really dropped the ball or they're trying to cover something up. And because Debbie's death was ruled an accident, all of her records have since been destroyed. It's now been 39 years, and whatever happened to Debbie that cold winter day remains a mystery.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This man murdered his girlfriend and then died of a heart attack while he was burying her. In May 2022, locals rang police after they noticed a man unresponsive in his garden. Police in South Carolina raced to the scene and they found the body of 60-year-old Joseph McKinnon. He was found lying next to a big hole in the ground that he'd been digging. It also became apparent that his girlfriend Patricia was missing. Now, police tried and failed to get hold of her and then eventually found blood in the pair's home. When they questioned her work colleagues, it turned out that she hadn't turned up to work that day, and that was extremely unusual. When police did some further digging into the case, they discovered that actually the hole that Joseph was digging was a grave for Patricia. Joseph had attacked her and then wrapped her body up in bin bags. After killing her, he'd had a heart attack while trying to conceal her body.
Nothing could have prepared me for the end of this story. So when I was little, I used to always complain about a scratching noise coming from the room next to me. My dad actually converted the guest bedroom next to my room into a home office, and I was never allowed in there. He was a really busy man. One night, I was laying in bed, unable to sleep, when I thought I heard a small sob come from his office. I could faintly make out the sound of a woman crying, but I knew I wasn't allowed to go in there. And honestly, at that point, I was kind of too afraid to anyways. The next day, I told my dad what I had heard, and he told me it was probably just a bad dream. But that didn't make any sense to me because I knew what I had heard. My dad spent the entire day in his office that day. I didn't see him come out once. The next night, I waited until my father was asleep, and I did what I knew I shouldn't do. I went into his office. And when I opened the door, there were no books. There was no desk. There wasn't even a single chair. Just scratched into the walls a million times. Help me.
These are 3 California creatures you never heard about. Up first is the Dark Watchers, and they're usually sighted in the mountains of California, and are described as tall, featureless, dark silhouettes, often wearing brimmed hats and having walking sticks. If you ever see a Dark Watcher, whatever you do, never approach it, because if you do, you will completely vanish forever. Next is Tahoe Tessie, who is a water creature and is living in Lake Tahoe. It's been described as having smooth skin, and is apparently so big it's the size of a bus. So next time you go to Lake Tahoe, you better look around for Tahoe Tessie. Finally is the Lone Pine Devil. This is also a creature who is often sighted in the mountains of California, and it's described as a large creature with both bird and reptile qualities. They have razor-sharp claws and venomous fangs. So what creature do you think the creepiest is? In my opinion, it has to be the Dark Watchers just because of how creepy and weird they sound. But either way, let me know which one is the scariest to you.
Whatever you do not look into her eyes.
My father locked me in our basement for 11 days and claimed not to know I was there. My name is Charles Bothwell V. I was 12 years old in 2014 when my father, Charles Bothwell IV, still had custody of me and mistreated me. In June 2014, my father reported me missing. The police conducted an intensive search, but eventually, I was found hidden in the basement of the family home, approximately 11 days after being reported missing. I lived in inhumane conditions. My parents deprived me of food, subjected me to repeated abuse and violence, and cut me off from all social contact. My father even pleaded for public assistance on television during my supposed disappearance, while he himself was the perpetrator. The case took a shocking turn when investigators discovered that my father was aware of my presence in the basement. Both my father and mother were arrested and charged with severe parental neglect. Investigators also found evidence of abuse against me. I was subsequently placed under the custody of Child Protective Services. My father was then sentenced to 18 months probation and ordered to take anger classes, and he will no longer be allowed to approach or contact me.
I threw my baby from the 4th floor. My name is Sonia Hermosillo, and I was 42 years old in 2011 when I committed the worst act. I had 3 children, including 2 little girls, and my baby No Medina, a 7-month-old boy with autism. My husband and my daughter had already noticed that since the birth of my son No, I had a different behavior. His illness and various health problems, such as the flat head that required him to wear a helmet all the time, had particularly affected me, and I often neglected the way I took care of him. That's why my husband decided not to leave me alone with our baby, but I took advantage of the fact that he was in the shower to take him and leave with him. That day, he was supposed to undergo tests at the hospital, so I drove there, and once I arrived, I parked on the 4th floor of the parking lot. Once out of the car, I thought that throwing him from the top of the 4 floors might be a good idea to see if he could survive. So I took him, removed the helmet he was supposed to wear, and threw him, and he died instantly. I was quickly arrested by the police. Once arrested, I said that all of this was due to mental problems. I confessed to the police that I killed him because of the problems he had. I was then sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole.
This is the time I was almost abducted by a serial killer. In February of 2012, I went to go visit my grandfather's grave for his birthday. His death was a pretty hard thing for me to process, as he only died in March of 2011, so it was all still pretty new to me. I was kneeling in front of his grave crying and thinking to myself, when all of a sudden I looked up and see a man running at me full speed from the woods in front of me. I was able to get myself to my truck pretty quickly before he got to me, but by the time I got in the truck, he was only about 50 feet away. I got in my car before he could get to me and locked the doors, much to his displeasure. He threw his hands up as if he had lost a football game. I started my truck and started driving out as fast as I could, but not before I passed him. I didn't break eye contact with him the entire time I was driving past, so I got a really good look at him. So cut to a few years later, I'm pretty bored at work, so I download this random app that has a bunch of paranormal, UFO, cryptid, and serial killer stories on it. And as I'm browsing through stories, I come across one that makes my heart absolutely drop. There was a photo of a man I recognized very well, Israel Keys, who was most known for murdering an underage girl in Alaska, dismembering her, and throwing the pieces of her body in a lake. He would bury kill kits in places long before he ever committed the crimes. He had been killing for a few years, to the point where no one really knew what his actual death toll was, and he would eventually go on to take his own life in prison. At the end of this book I read about him, they mentioned his favorite places to abduct people: public parks and cemeteries. I often wonder if he left any kill kits in that cemetery. You were fast, Israel, but I was faster.
This abandoned prison is straight out of a nightmare. Welcome to the Mid-Orange Correctional Facility in Warwick, New York. Originally opened as a reform school for boys, this sprawling complex was eventually turned into a prison for men. And over the years, it housed a number of deplorable criminals from New York State, including an infamous serial killer. As you walk the halls of this crumbling complex, you can feel the energy. You can feel the souls reaching out to try to talk to you. One of the more infamous spirits that haunts this property is that of a teenager named Jimmy. Obviously, back when this was a reform school for boys, abuse was rampant in these halls. And one teenager named Jimmy decided to take his own life by hanging himself in one of the buildings out back. Now, I can tell you from first-hand experience that this place is definitely haunted. I spent the night there ghost hunting while filming an episode of my show with the New York Post, which is available on YouTube now, and you could just feel the energy of these buildings emanating. I mean, there were a number of crazy historical things that happened here in these buildings, including a riot, and obviously tons of people lost their lives here over the years. I mean, the Mid-Orange Correctional Facility was known as one of the most violent prisons in the state of New York. And every single part of this complex is haunted, including this eerie church that was left abandoned after the building was closed. When this building sat empty for years, rituals were performed by people that broke in here, and the dark energy from these rituals still remains. If you want to see the full video that I filmed here, just head to the New York Post's YouTube channel, and for more spooky content, follow me on YouTube at The Paranormal Files.
This baby was kidnapped, and then the parents received the wrong baby back. In April 1964, Dora Fronzak gave birth to baby Paul. Although this should have been one of the happiest days of her life, it soon escalated into a nightmare. Paul was kidnapped. A woman posed as a nurse, and using her fake profession, she managed to steal Paul from the Chicago hospital. Word spread that the baby was missing, and 600 homes were frantically searched. Paul's parents made devastating pleas for his return. Now, police only had Paul's ear shape and blood type to go off. However, they did soon find an abandoned child in New Jersey. When Dora saw him, she was incredibly relieved. She had baby Paul back, and that would be the last of it for 10 years. One Christmas, when he was hunting for presents, 10-year-old Paul discovered a memory box, and inside this box were news clippings from his kidnapping. When he confronted his mum about this, she shut the conversation down, but it stayed in the back of his mind. Paul started to have doubts about his true history. In 2012, he did a DNA test, and the results shocked everyone. Paul was not the Paul who'd been kidnapped. He wasn't biologically related to either of his parents. Now, sadly, his parents were actually furious at Paul, and they refused to speak to him for a year. In 2015, Paul discovered that he was actually born as Jack, and he had a twin sister, Jill. His biological mum had a drinking problem, and his dad was a violent man. Meanwhile, the FBI ended up reopening the case of missing baby Paul. It was actually another home DNA test that revealed where he was. A man named Kevin Beatty was actually missing baby Paul. Now, the woman who raised him had actually passed away, so some mystery still remains about missing baby Paul. Tragically, in 2019, Dora actually arranged to meet her long-lost son, Kevin. However, before the pair could reunite, Kevin actually died of cancer. Paul's twin sister Jill is still missing. He continues to look for her, and you could actually help solve this cold case. By taking home DNA tests and uploading your information onto jedmatch.com, we can all help to solve cold cases.
This is the backpacking beheadings, the tragic case of Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin. Before Louise Jesperson and Marie Newlin embarked on their journey to Morocco, Louise posted on Facebook letting her friends know she would be making a trip to Morocco and was asking anyone out there if they knew about Mount Tubkul, and the theory is this post put the attackers on high alert, and apparently how the girls would become targets of the attackers. Nobody knows how true this is, but it's the leading theory. But the girls continued on their journey, and eventually as night fell, they set up camp to rest. During their hike, it's believed the attackers were stalking their victims, waiting for them to stop, waiting for them to get further away from civilization, and once this happened, the attacks ensued. The attack was brutal, and both Louise and Maureen were brutally beheaded, and some reports even claim the girls were sexually assaulted. The murder of Louise Jesperson was recorded and posted online. It's believed Marie Newlin was murdered first, but there's no video of that, though people online claim it's out there. The video starts with Louise Jesperson lying on her stomach, and she's wearing a t-shirt and underwear. And almost immediately, the terrorist attempts to behead her. But he starts from the back of the neck, and that usually isn't the way to do it. Right when he cuts, Louise says ow and begins to scream, and apparently in her native language she was begging for her mother. Once the man beheading her realizes it's hard to behead someone from behind, he then turns her over, and one of the people he was with stomps on her face to hold her down, and he then starts beheading her from the neck. And at this point, there's a lot of blood and a lot of screaming and gurgling. He then begins hacking at her neck to complete the beheading, and once he's beheaded Louise Jesperson, he picks up her head and takes it to her tent and places it inside, and the video concludes. It's a quick video, but it's extremely bloody, extremely horrible, and extremely sad. It's definitely one of the worst beheadings I ever covered, mainly because these girls were very young, very naive, and didn't deserve what happened to them at all. One of the girls even posted how the world is safe and that we shouldn't judge people, and it's super sad that they paid the price of this with their life. Please don't go looking for this video because it will stick with you forever and it's really not worth it. Rest in peace to Louise Jesperson and Maureen Yulin.
This is one of the most dangerous men in Canadian history, Shane Pattinson. And while he doesn't really look it on the outside, he really is a dangerous and twisted man. So in 2012, Shane was sentenced to 5 years in prison because he had collected over 4,500 CP images depicting the extreme essay of young girls under the age of 5. 4,500 images. So he served most of his prison sentence and he was released in 2015 and was immediately sent to a halfway house with the Salvation Army. But just shortly after getting out of prison, when he went to the halfway house, investigators performed a routine check-in on him, and what they found was extremely shocking. When investigators checked in on Shane, they walked into the room, they found him naked from the waist down, he had 3 devices open, each of them displaying CP images, and he was actively toying with himself at the time that they walked in to these images. When these investigators performed searches on what Shane had in his room, they discovered that in the short time he was out from prison, he had already accrued thousands of additional CP images and was actively sharing them with other users across the internet. This means that he served his first sentence for CP possession, he got out, and almost immediately went back to collecting it and obsessing over it. And like I said before, this guy had thousands of victims across the planet, and he was working his way into the dark web to connect with other pedophiles across the world. Now, Shane has a pretty disturbing life story. When he was only 3 years old, he allegedly played mommy and daddy with a 4-year-old cousin of his, a game which turned graphic, if you know what I mean. He then stated that his great-grandfather sexually abused him for years until he hit puberty. And he said that he first started viewing CP images when he was only 14 years old. He also stated that when he was just 14 years old, he SA'd an 8-year-old friend of his sister's. He also told interviewers that he was intensely aroused by smelling women's undergarments and by sniffing dirty, soiled diapers. So he was eventually sentenced to 7 years in prison, but with his time served, he was actually only given 5.5 years. And this happened back in 2018, which means, if it all worked out in his favor, this year, Shane Pattinson will be released from prison. And after reading this dude's story and learning about what he does, I do not think that he's going to be able to live in a normal society. I don't know how or why he's being released so quickly, but I'm just really afraid for what's going to happen when he's out next.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This is the 10 days of horror that shocked Pennsylvania. On the 5th of July 2017, Jimmy Patrick left his house. He was a student living with his grandparents, and he was going to Cosmo DiNardo's house to buy marijuana. Cosmo had a history of schizophrenia and had been sectioned the year prior. He was known to police and had been arrested for possessing a gun. Now, this was illegal due to his mental health issues. Jimmy got to Cosmo's house, which was in a remote location. As he got out of the car, Cosmo shot him. He then dug a hole and buried him. The following day, when Jimmy never came home, his granddad reported him missing. Meanwhile, Cosmo was planning other drug deals. He agreed to meet with another student, 19-year-old Dean Finocchiaro. Before picking up Dean, he picked up his cousin, Sean Kratz. Now, Sean was also known to police, and he had many arrests due to theft and robbery. The pair decided to rob Dean instead of selling him substances. Again, Dean was shot and killed at the farmland. They wrapped him in tarp and put him in a metal tank. The same day, Cosmo met Thomas Mio and Mark Sturgis while his cousin stayed at the property. When they got back, Cosmo shot Thomas as he got out of the truck and he fell to the ground. Mark tried to sprint away, but Cosmo shot him and killed him. Cosmo then ran over Thomas with his truck, crushing him to death. He put the 2 bodies in the metal tank and poured petrol over them and set them alight. That evening and the following day, more of the parents reported their sons missing. Cosmo then contacted somebody in order to sell them Thomas's car. Meanwhile, however, police were tracking the cars of the missing boys. They found Thomas's car at Cosmo's family home. Cosmo was questioned but lied his way out of this. On day 6 of the investigation, police tracked one of the missing boys' phones to Cosmo's family home. Cosmo was arrested on firearms charges and his bail was set to $1 million. His dad actually paid 10% of this in cash and Cosmo was free. Police then managed to rearrest Cosmo because of the fact that he tried to sell a missing boy's car. Shortly after, police discovered the bodies of 3 of the boys on the property. Cosmo confessed to police and then told them where to find Jimmy's body. He got 4 consecutive life sentences, and his cousin Sean got life in prison plus 18 to 36 years.
On March 17th in Pensacola, Florida, bridge worker Mason Ponder came across an unusually heavy suitcase. He had no idea that it contained the body of Gannon. Here's his testimony in court.
I was the first one to unzip it, and before we opened it, as soon as we unzipped it, we immediately noticed the smell. That's what hit us first. I remember looking up at Matt, who's quite a bit taller than me, and I said, Matt, I think there's something dead in here. And unfortunately, we do come across, sometimes somebody will throw out a litter of puppies or something in a bag, and that's not uncommon. And it smelled, but it was so strong, it was different that day. So I didn't initially open it, and we kind of thought about what we were going to do first. When we finally went ahead and unzipped the rest of it, the smell was so overpowering. We kind of took a step back, and the first thing I remember seeing was just 2 little feet, and that had little football socks on them. The best I remember, I remember there being little socks on them. And before anything else happened, we couldn't really make out what it was. Matt dumped the suitcase over, and of course we initially immediately knew it was a body. But after looking at it, it was we couldn't tell male or female, boy or girl. We didn't know. A lot of black hair.
Gannon's autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head, a gunshot wound to his jaw, and 12 separate stab wounds. This 11-year-old boy had suffered horrifically at the hands of his evil stepmother. Letitia was charged with the murder of Gannon and faces a total of 13 charges, including first-degree murder, child abuse causing death, and tampering with evidence. In 2022, Letitia changed her plea from guilty to not guilty by reason of insanity, stating that she was insane at the time of Gannon's murder. This delayed the start of a trial because she had to be evaluated multiple times to determine the state of her mental health. In March 2023, the jury was selected, and Letitia's defence claimed that the latest sanity report showed her to be insane at the time of Gannon's murder, claiming that she suffered a major psychotic crack at the time of the brutal killing. The state, however, have argued that the fact she tried to cover the crime up so well and throw off the police shows that she knew right from wrong. The trial continues, and you can follow it live over on Law and Crime. Pure evil or mentally ill? In 2012, when Zachary Davis was just 15 years old, he entered his mother's bedroom in the dead of night and struck her over the head 20 times with a sledgehammer.
Did you kill your mother?
Yeah.
And why did you kill her?
She wasn't taking care of my family.
And where did you hit her?
In the head.
Where was she when you did this?
She was asleep.
You've got a sledgehammer in one hand, and you open that door. What's going through your head at that moment?
My mind was pretty much blank. I could just hear the hammer hitting her head.
And what did it sound like?
There was this wet thumping sound.
Zachary was a very quiet child. He lived with his parents and his older brother Josh, but when he was just 9 years old, his dad died from Lou Gehrig's disease, and it sent Zachary into a downward spiral. He was seen by a psychiatrist and diagnosed with schizophrenia and depressive disorder, and he started therapy. During therapy, Zachary went through the first 2 phases common in the bereavement process, numbness and depression, but he never made it to the third, recovery. His mother Melanie pulled him out of therapy after just 4 sessions and moved the family to Tennessee, thinking that they were starting a new life. Melanie worked as a paralegal and tried her best to provide a life for her 2 boys, but Zachary was becoming more and more withdrawn. By the time Zachary was 15, he was a complete outcast at school. He often spoke in whispers and wore the same hoodie every day, pulled up around his face. He had an app on his phone about serial killers and another listed torture devices. Zachary showed absolutely no signs of violence outwardly, but beneath the surface, something awful was bubbling. August 10th, 2012 was like any other day. Zachary, his brother and his mum went to watch a movie, and then when they got home, Melanie went up to bed. Once Zachary was sure that his mum was asleep and after his brother had also gone to bed, he grabbed a sledgehammer from the basement, went into his mother's room and started hitting her over the head, again and again, 20 times in total. Melanie actually woke up after the first blow and started gasping for air. She then started to experience seizures while her son hit her over the head again and again until he was sure she was dead. He then went to the family's game room where he doused it in petrol and whiskey and set it on fire, intending to kill his brother Josh. The only problem was that he'd shut the door to the game room and the fire didn't spread as quickly as he'd hoped. Josh escaped and went to a neighbour's house. Zachary was found 10 miles from home and on his arrest he said, "I didn't feel anything when I killed her." Zachary's trial for the murder of his mother began, and when he was asked if he could go back in time, would he do it again? He smirked and said, "Yes, and I'd kill Josh with the sledgehammer too." Zachary showed absolutely zero remorse in the courtroom, but his defence argued that he'd been hearing his father's voice and had been told to kill his mother. His grandma also testified that he hadn't got the help that he needed as he was mentally ill, and he's not a monster, he's a child that made a terrible mistake. But after hearing from Zachary himself, the jury weren't so compassionate. He laughed when he described how heavy the murder weapon was and took joy in describing the sound it made when it hit his mother's head. He was asked why he'd hit her so many times, and his response was, "I wanted to make sure she was dead." The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before reaching a guilty verdict. Zachary was sentenced to life with a minimum of 51 years, meaning he'll be in his mid-60s when he's eligible for parole.
Imagine getting married only to be decapitated by your husband 3 months later. 21-year-old couple Jared and Angie got married in October 2022. Around 4 p.m. on the 11th of January, police were called to their home in Texas. Police made a grim discovery in the pair's bathroom after finding, quote, what appeared to be the head of the victim to be in the shower, end quote. Angie's body was discovered on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. It was actually Jared's poor parents that initially made this discovery after entering the home. They then obviously alerted police to what they found. Jared was arrested and has confessed to killing his wife with a kitchen knife. Jared was actually captured on CCTV, casually stealing a bottle of beer from Angie's workplace just minutes after it's believed that he killed her. Angie's friends have reported to police that the couple's relationship was toxic and Jared was very controlling. Jared's bond is currently set at $500,000. This schoolboy stabbed his teacher to death in front of a classroom full of students. 61-year-old Anne Maguire was a Spanish teacher teaching in Leeds. She'd actually worked at the school for 40 years and she was only 5 months off retirement. However, in April 2014, something absolutely horrific happened. One of her students was 15-year-old Will Cornick. He'd always been described as a smart student who never really caused any trouble. Classmates regarded him as a polite student, but after he got diagnosed with diabetes, his personality seemed to change. In 2013, he tried to join the army, but because of his diagnosis, he was rejected. Being in the army had been his dream, so this was really upsetting for him. After failing to complete his Spanish homework, he was given detention by Anne. He also expressed a wish to her that he wanted to drop Spanish, but she wouldn't let him, which only angered him more. He began to develop a deep-rooted grudge against Anne. Shockingly, he reportedly messaged his friends on Facebook asking if one of them would kill her for him for £10. During one school day, halfway through his Spanish class, Will decided to get up and attack Anne with a knife. The classmates watched on in horror as he chased her out of the classroom. When there, another teacher heard her screams and tried to shield Anne from any more blows from him. Will then allegedly returned to his class and told his classmates how it was a shame that he hadn't killed her. However, Anne did actually pass away from her injuries. Will later admitted that he did plan also to kill 2 other teachers. One of them was actually pregnant at the time. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant.